pk4sa.com para inscribir a tus hijos hoy.
Welcome to the San Antonio Regional Education Forum, our 6th annual forum, our annual effort to continuing effort to connect educators with the broader community to explore the most pressing challenges and opportunities in Texas public schools. I'm Robert Rivard, the editor of the San Antonio Report, and very pleased to be with you and have you on our forum today. This event's free and open to the public, thanks to our many partners who serve on the PK-12 Public Education Forum Committee, and to our generous sponsors, including our leadership sponsors, Mike and Louise Burke, and Pre-K4SA. We just saw that wonderful video. Our gold sponsors as well, the Gambrinus Company, First Mark Credit Union, the law firm of Schulman Lopez, Hoffer and Edelstein, and Idea Public Schools. For our full list of sponsors, click on the link that's in the chat room. Well, here at the report, we're vaccinated. We're preparing to go back to work at our offices in historic St. Paul Square and look forward to the day sooner than later, we hope, when we can once again host in-person events. But for now, we are presenting our summer series of 3 public education forums virtually, one today, another in June, and in August. And the chat room, again, will have those dates and registration links. So we hope we can count on you to join us for all 3 events this summer. Today happens to be the first day of the San Antonio Report Spring Membership Drive. The SA Report is a 501c3 nonprofit, so we depend on you as members to support our local nonpartisan journalism and our civic engagement events. Please visit our homepage and find that donate button during the program, or there'll be a link in the chat room as well. Thank you so much ahead of time for your support. Well, let's get started with today's program, the battle over $18 billion in federal stimulus funds for public education. Of course, when we organized the event, the state leaders, elected leaders, Governor Abbott, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, and the Texas legislature had not yet released any of the funds, but more than $11.2 billion now has been released to Texas public schools, or is going to be released. It's been authorized, and so we're in a somewhat different situation, and that will guide our conversation today. We have a 2-panel event, and I'm going to introduce the first 3 panelists now. Kevin Brown is the Executive Director of the Texas Association of School Administrators, a post he's held since 2018, and he's no stranger to our audience in San Antonio because he previously served for 10 years as the superintendent of the Alamo Heights Independent School District. Kevin, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks, Bob. I'm glad to be with you and all my friends in San Antonio. I wish I was with you in person, but it's good to be with you here.
Well, close enough. Marisa Perez-Diaz is serving her 3rd term as the District 3 or South Texas representative on the State Board of Education. She joins us from San Antonio today. Marisa, thanks so much for being part of the program.
Good morning. Thank you for having me, and thank you for putting on such an important event.
I think you're going to get the award, Marisa, for the best, most artistic background today. Very nice. Would love to hear more about that later. And finally, Margaret Spellings is joining us. She's president and CEO of the nonprofit Texas 2036 in Austin and Dallas, which works to enable Texans to make smart policy decisions through long-term planning, accessible data, and statewide engagement in Texas as we move toward our bicentennial year in 2036. Margaret also previously served as the Secretary of Education in the administration of President George W. Bush, and she was the first working mother to hold that cabinet position, I'll add. So thank you for joining us, Secretary Spellings, today.
Thank you, Bob, and thank you for all you do to keep us all better informed about what's going on in San Antonio and the implications for our state. Really appreciate you.
Well, thank you, because my job today is to let the 3 very smart people we have on our panel help our audience understand where we are. And Kevin, I'll start with you. There is an unprecedented sum of money in the pipeline for Texas public schools, the 1,022 or whatever it is public school districts we have in the state. The needs are serious after more than a year and a half of pandemic, but so is the accountability for spending so much money in a relatively short period of time. Why don't you just set the table for us a little bit as a former superintendent and now somebody advising your colleagues across the state?
Yeah. Thanks, Bob. It is, it's been a traumatic year for all of our students, our teachers, our superintendents, our boards, all of you that are watching. It's been a difficult year, but in particular, we're worried about our students, and they have suffered a pretty significant trauma educationally. It's difficult. We finished last year remotely. In the state of Texas. Many of them continued remotely through the school year. Many were in person as well. So you had different experiences that are there. But we're very worried about learning loss and students falling behind. We know that there were equity gaps already in our state and nation. And we believe these gaps are going to widen during the pandemic. So the need is there academically. I would say equal need is going to be social emotional support for our students. Again, being home, being isolated, being alone. We know child abuse reports declined significantly during the year, which does not mean that there was less abuse. It just means there was less reports because schools often are our first responders in terms of making those reports. And then, there's infrastructure needs that come out of this as well. And so for us, we've been working with superintendents throughout the year, trying to help connect them to one another to make sure that they are using best practices in order to help their students. With this stimulus fund, and there's three really tranches of stimulus funds. The first one was supplanted by the state. We were one of 2 states in the nation that did not pass that through as supplemental funding. The second tranche, which is we call ESSER 2, has yet to be released to schools, but we're hopeful that it will. And the $11.2 billion that you referred to, Bob, has been released. That's ESSER 3, and it will go as supplemental funding. What we want is for those funds to go to learning loss, to go to social emotional needs, and to infrastructure, probably third. On the academic needs, we're talking about the need for before and after school kinds of instruction, summer school, intensive work in summer school. We're talking about small group breakouts during school so that we can provide more intensive instruction, accelerated instruction to catch students up. It's very difficult to catch students up. We know that. And so we're going to have kind of all hands on deck. We're going to be needing to provide professional development for our teachers so that we give them the best support that they need and the best tools and resources that they need to help our students get to where they need to go. And we've got to provide wraparound services in terms of counselors and social workers, food, nutrition, and so forth. And those are big needs that we have out there. And our superintendents have been developing plans for this. We actually did that before the stimulus funding was released, took those plans to legislators and said, look, we have good plans if you will flow this money to our schools. It is needed. It's needed urgently. We can't just do this immediately. We need to be able to identify needs, staff those, even for summer school coming up, and make sure that we're providing everything, all of our students what they need, even this summer. We also know that this is not a 1-year kind of thing. In 2009, we had stimulus funds. Most of those were one-time expenditures, and we were dealing with an economic issue, not with a learning and social emotional issue. We're going to need these funds to flow to schools so that we can support the boots on the ground and to support the students. And we worry that those funds get diverted. We've heard of a lot of plans to divert funds for various kinds of things. But in our conversations with U.S. Department of Education, these funds are supposed to be supplemental. They're supposed to flow to K-12. And we have until, depending on which ones, we have until 2024 to be able to spend those. And we think that our schools can do that, can do it effectively. From an accountability standpoint, we've got to be very transparent in what we do. We need to make sure our boards are involved, that we're communicating to our communities. And there will no doubt be a reporting piece of this that goes to the state and to the federal government.
Thank you, Kevin. Marisa, you can respond to that and also add your perspective. This is the crazy time in the Texas legislature as the session nears its moment of chaos and conclusion. And I wonder if you think, with so many agendas at play, so many education bills still out there, fighting to get out of committee whether or not our state elected leaders have their eye on the ball in terms of the needs of Texas schools and what the State Board of Education is doing to play an important role in people coming back into in classroom learning and addressing all these issues Kevin outlined.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Thank you again, Bob, for such a thoughtful question. I think there are a lot of moving pieces as we look at what education is going to mean for not just our students, but for our educators as well. And when I say educators, I don't just mean our classroom teachers. I'm talking about everybody from our administrative staff to our custodial staff to our child nutrition staff, right? So these funds impact everyone across the board that works in education. And I wanted to start by saying, as I was listening to Kevin speak, he's a perfect example of the sort of educators we have across the state. He centers students. He's focused on the student support. For my part, I'll add that one of the things that for me is very important is ensuring the social emotional well-being of our educators as well. I think Kevin did a fantastic job laying out what the ESSER funding means in terms of the three phases that we have either received or are still waiting to receive. Part of ESSER 3 that's just recently been released is the allowance for investment in our teacher salaries and benefits. The key language in there is whether or not it's reasonable and necessary. And from the perspective that I have in speaking to educators across the state, specifically educators here in Bexar County through organizations like SALT, which is an incredible organization, I've learned that, it's not just about the demands that our educators and our support staff in schools have had to address. It's also that they have to balance their work life with their home lives. These individuals, many are also parents who are dealing with students in the classroom as well, and whether or not their students are able to return. And so I think bringing back the humanity to how we spend those dollars is going to be incredibly important, and directing some of that necessary and reasonable funding toward the social emotional support for our educators as they re-enter the class or as they have already been in the class, helping them sort of navigate the issues that impact them outside of the classroom, that sometimes it's just impossible to disconnect from inside the classroom. So for me, that's really key. I think another point that Kevin spoke to was the fact that, as we look at the ESSER 3 funds that have just been released, we need to be really responsible about how that's done. Last year, the supplanting of those funds really negatively impacted school districts where I think that, across the board, districts could have been in a much better position to offer support services for staff and students and families had that funding been used to supplement the way the majority of the states in our country did. So in terms of the responsibility that the State Board of Education has, constantly holding our commissioner's feet to the fire and asking the really tough questions on the dais and pushing for him to respond directly to some of the concerns that we have, I think is the responsibility of every SBOE member, because we have a platform to talk to him about these things. And, TEA, I want to speak with grace because I know that they have been stretched thin as well. But sometimes the interpretation that TEA has regarding how ESSER funds should be spent is not always run through all of the channels necessary to ensure that it's the most efficient and effective way of using those dollars. One of the things that I think is really important to note is that a minimum requirement for our LEAs to utilize this ESSER funds, is to go out and get stakeholder feedback from community members, and again, that involves everybody across the board. In terms of what they hope to see accomplished with this allocation of funding. Now the timeline is incredibly tight, and whether or not that's going to be done with due diligence is a concern of mine and some of my colleagues on the board. We want to make sure that everybody has a space at the table to have these conversations, And when we're working with tight timelines, sometimes the agency doesn't have the capacity to do it. So it's important for us, again, for me as a State Board of Education member, to go out and speak to community and see how that is impacting our districts and where funds really need to be allocated to make, again, an efficient and impactful difference for our school districts.
Well, thank you, Marisa. And that concern is one I really want to get Secretary Spellings to address, but say firsthand that Texas 2036, from the viewpoint of a journalist, has burst onto the state scene as a remarkable data-driven resource, although it seems like almost since you opened your doors, we've been in an emergency mode in this state. And for an organization with a mission that's clearly long-term, heading toward our bicentennial, you're having to wrestle with an awful lot of immediacy in terms of issues. And I wonder, Secretary Spellings, how you do see the concern Marisa brought up, but at the same time, the very serious needs that Kevin articulated.
Yeah, so I just want to stipulate much of what Kevin and Marisa said about the challenges and the needs. They are great, no doubt about it. But my own view is that this is a half full glass. A year ago, if the three of us were convened on a panel, we would have been desperately worried about our economy, about layoffs, about the funding of House Bill 3, the reforms that had been put in place, and on and on. And happily, those things are not at risk. And they, when I first arrived back in Texas, there was a lot of high-fiving and self-congratulating going on about the important law that House Bill 3 is, with interventions and more equitable funding and reading academies and pay for performance and all of those things that are still on the books, but sadly have been waylaid a bit by COVID. I think our job as policymakers and educators is to have a very much can do, will do, engendering confidence with our parents and our publics about adequately resourcing the challenges before that. And we will have and do have the resources. So in my view, we need to accelerate learning for students. We need to triage. We need to get them back on track socially, emotionally, and academically. And we can. And that should be our mantra. We know what to do. We have research-based practices we can bring to bear. Kevin mentioned some of them: more time on task, summer school, intensive tutoring, all those sorts of strategies that our superintendents have been talking about and are prepared to do. A few silver linings, hard lessons, however you want to say it, from this pandemic is that our citizens, our families, understand the centrality of our public schools and how they operate well, what they mean in terms of support, friendships, food service, academic support, counseling, special needs students. So they get it. Secondly, we've had the opportunity to really use technology in many ways, much more dramatically, much more intelligently than we ever would have but for the pandemic. And so we need to build on those foundations. They're going to allow us to do progress monitoring for students in ways that are more nimble and more facile. We'll get to that in a second. Our parents are more engaged and more knowledgeable about where their students are than ever before. If your student can't read, you know it, as opposed to seeing that report card in a backpack and not asking too many questions. So I'm optimistic that we can and will use these resources wisely and well to triage, to recover, and to get students back on track. Because if we don't, Bob, I'm answering your question in a roundabout day, the future of Texas, the next 15 years, the celebration of our bicentennial will be very, very bleak. And that is our calling. That is our responsibility. I want to bring up one other point. We were talking a little bit before we assembled with our public group about some of the things that are happening kind of in the back rooms or under the hood at the Texas legislature. And some of them are quite worrisome to me. Texas has led the nation for the last, 40 plus years, 35 years, in creating a coherent kind of architecture around expectations for all students. We've had assessment, we've had reporting, we've had transparency, we've had interventions, we've had, a framework that this works within. And those, of course, that was built upon in House Bill 3. And there's some worrisome activities. The gremlins are at work at the Capitol, undermining some of those things in terms of accountability and assessment and the authority for our terrific, best in the country Commissioner of Education to really make sure that we're all held accountable for the achievement of every single student. Because if we aren't, Texas is not going to be a great place to live and work.
Well, thank you. And let me go back to all three of you with a follow-up question. Probably most people in our audience don't understand exactly how the money is flowing from the state to the individual public school districts, what timeline they have. Is this a one-time infusion of an extraordinary amount of revenue, and the districts have a very defined timeline to invest or spend that money? Or is this going to be a multi-year proposition, Kevin, as you outlined in your comments, that we're not going to make up for learning loss in the next academic year alone? And so the many issues, mental health issues, the digital divide, teacher stress, enhanced summer school, all these things that are going to happen. Is this money addressing that in just one calendar year, or is it a multi-year proposition? How will it work?
Yeah, and Margaret probably knows this as well as anybody, but in our conversations with the U.S. Department of Education, ESSER 3 funds, which is the funds that were just released, are basically being used as a title grant, like title funds. So they flow to schools based on our students who are low-income students. And that qualify for title that goes through to those campuses. So it actually helps in a lot of ways with the equity issues that we have in our schools, because the higher degree of poverty you have, the more stimulus funds you're going to draw down. Those funds are available to be spent between now and the end of September of 2024. We're still waiting on some guidelines in terms of maintenance of equity, which is another piece that the federal government will help with guidelines. And so we'll be watching for those very closely, because there will be some important information on the potential pacing and where those monies are applied within a district. But the bottom line is, and I agree with Margaret, the glass is half full on this. I'll tell you, a year ago, we were pretty down about where we were heading, what resources might be available. I've talked to both Margaret and Marisa during the past year a number of times where we were pretty downtrodden about where all this was going. But here we are. We do have some resources. I think we still have work to do to make sure that they get to the schools, especially with ESSER 2 funds. Those have to be spent by the end of September of 2023, I believe. Again, still waiting some specific guidelines, but that's what we believe. So this is a multi-year prospect, Bob, and it should be, because this you just don't recover from this immediately. But if you told me a year ago that House Bill 3 would have been fully funded, that we would have been held harmless throughout the school year, and that we would have this kind of significant supplemental income coming in, supplemental revenue to deal with this, there's some really good work being done. We just need to make sure that at the state level, those funds don't get diverted, and that at the local level, we use them responsibly, and that we work together to do that. We have the mechanisms to do that. We have the talent to do that. San Antonio is uniquely positioned to do that. You have some great leaders there in the community. When we went through the stimulus money back in 2009, we put that on our website. We ran checks across the website. Anybody could go and look at what we were doing. Public schools are very, very transparent. Is it possible that there will be waste somewhere? Of course, that's possible. You're dealing with a lot of money. And if those things happen, we need to hold those people accountable for it. But the vast, vast majority of public educators and education systems will put this to good use. Our students will benefit. And I really believe that as bad as this pandemic has been, that you could see a renaissance in education come after this. as we often see in big historical moments where there are difficult things, whether it was a pandemic in the 1917-18, whether it's a world war, whatever, when our economy is kind of roaring back, it appears. And we just need to make sure that our students roar back with that economy so that we have a long-term success for our bicentennial and beyond. But it's going to take all hands on deck. It's also going to take patience to say, look, you don't go from, if you're in kindergarten and you missed a good chunk of kindergarten, because remember, there's a lot of kids that weren't in school this past year. Parents chose to homeschool. And in some cases, we had about 158,000 kids that were homeschooled this year. We don't know if they were in a good situation, a bad situation, somewhere in between. So that triage needs to happen early for those students. And then we need to be able to differentiate what we're going to do for all of them. We have to have robust plans. Part of my job in my association is connecting those leaders to one another, providing the best professional development we can for them, and help them roll out those plans as well as we can, so it makes a difference for students. And right now, I'm working at the Capitol to try to make sure the funds get released to the schools. And we still have work to do there, but I'm optimistic, and I will turn it over to Margaret and Marisa.
Well, I'd like to just build quickly on some of Kevin's comment and he and I are both involved in an effort at the University of Texas at Austin, a research to practice opportunity where we can really triage on reading and math recovery, accelerated learning. I mean, I think our number one metric as a state and as parents is going to be not, hey, can you get my kid caught up in another couple of 3 years? I mean, we're wasting daylight. And that's why these resources getting deployed immediately are so critical. Kids need to be in school this summer. We need to measure quickly and find out where they are. We need to provide the proper remedy to catch them up. And so, we have fallen in our state from the mid 30s to the low 40s in reading achievement for our third graders. And that was our starting line prior to the pandemic. And so we have a lot of work to do. But I'm confident with these resources, with the leadership we have, with our public universities and research-based strategies, we can get students caught up. I don't want to be a parent, or I don't want to be a policymaker having to explain to a parent why your child is still not reading on grade level 2 or 3 years from now. And I know Marisa doesn't want that either. She's nodding her head.
Yeah, so I'll sip at the half full glass at the table, and say that I agree with everything that both Margaret and Kevin have contributed. I think that we're in a much better place than we were a year ago. In looking at the role of the SBOE, typically we're waiting to interpret law that's coming through, and I think there's a silver lining. There is this is our optimal opportunity to look at education from a very different way. How do we approach education in a way that's equitable, that provides access and opportunity for all of our youth, right? And so as I think about the learning acceleration that needs to take place in the investment in summer enrichment programming and after school programming that's allowable through ESSER funds, I also don't want to lose sight of the fact that our special education population has really suffered an incredible amount during this time, and those ESSER funds can be used to relook at how we engage our spec ed population, and I think that's really, really important. And I'd be remiss if I didn't just shout out Senator Menendez, who proposed a bill this cycle, and it's making its way through the legislature right now. It's Senate Bill 89 that speaks to, and there's a companion bill in the House that was proposed by Representative Gonzalez out of El Paso, HB 144, both of which speak directly to special education supplements. And specifically in how it impacted, how special education students were impacted by COVID. And so what these supplements do is speak to their individualized education plans, and really takes a one-on-one look at what students need in order to get them caught up. And again, this specifically focuses on our special education population, because we know that while education halted for all of our students across the state, in fact, for special education, we saw major regression. And so thinking through how some of the legislature that's making some of the bills that are making their way through the legislature can impact how ESSER funds are used as well is going to be really, really important. So, to the GR folks that are working in public education, a quick call to action. I know that you're working, day and night right now as the legislative session comes to a close. But please continue to engage with our school districts, because there are a lot of moving parts and a lot of bills that are coming through that we can absolutely use to our benefit in addressing how we use these ESSER funds.
Well, thank you, Marisa. And, time is marching by quickly. We're going to bring on our three public school superintendents in a minute, but I want to give each of our three wonderful panelists a minute to sum up before we go. I take a real sense of urgency from all three of you that I think we've communicated, but also some very positive traction and reason for people to be very optimistic about what we can do with that funding and with the people in place that will be hopefully spending that money so wisely. But Kevin, let me give you a last word, and then Marisa, and then Secretary Spellings, please.
Well, Bob, first of all, thanks for having me on here. And I want to say a big thanks to all of you educators out there and education supporters, and also to Margaret and Marisa. It's an honor to be on a panel with them. I think everybody, all of us, need to say thank you to our teachers and principals, our bus drivers, cafeteria workers, our superintendents, our school board members, who have done so much and asked for so little in return. They've helped hold our country together. They've helped keep our kids going. They've made it through a snowpocalypse, right, where we had school buses going out and as warming stations. We had school buses during the pandemic going out and feeding people and providing Wi-Fi and all kinds of innovative and mission-driven kind of actions. And I think there's a lot to celebrate there. I also think it's a reminder of how important our public schools are to our local communities. And I would encourage people as we move forward to ask for ways you can support, ask for ways that you can be helpful. I think we all need to give each other some grace through this. Let's not let the pandemic divide our communities. Public education is nonpartisan, it's bipartisan. We work with all children, and whether you're for masks, against masks, whatever your political viewpoints are, one thing we can all agree on is our country and our state and our communities do a lot better when our public schools serve all children and they do it well. And we need every single child to be successful, because that means we have a bright future. So I appreciate all of our educators for all they've done. Bob, thanks for having me on this. I'm here to help in any way I can. For any of you, don't hesitate to reach out. It's been an honor being with all of you.
Thank you, Kevin. Marisa.
Yes. So I'll ditto the thanks and grace that Kevin extends to all of our education community supporters and those employed in the education environment. And a special thank you to organizations, Bob, like the Essay Report, who really have done a phenomenal job over this last year and a half to try to be as informative as possible when sometimes things are very, very unclear about how and when to navigate this very different time. The only thing that I'll add is, speaking from the position of an elected official, please hold us accountable for the decisions that we're making. It's really important that as we make decisions specifically in public education, that we center students, that, this shouldn't be a politicized issue, right? We have to make sure that the youth that we're investing in, whether that be through funds or other resource support, is really done in a way to ensure that we're preparing them not only for the futures that exist right now, the future possibilities, but for those that don't even exist yet. And so having just really supportive adults for the youth that are navigating this really unprecedented time is going to be really important. So I appreciate everybody that's tuned in today. It speaks volumes to the dedication that you have in ensuring that education continues to progress forward. And so it was definitely an honor to be here with you all, to be on a panel with Kevin and Margaret. Thank you. And as Kevin mentioned, I'm here as a support and as a resource for as long as you'll have me. I want to continue to be a voice that represents not just our students, not just our families, but also our education community.
Marisa, thank you for your service and for the shout out to my wonderful colleagues who have done a great job through the pandemic. And we'll look to our members in the spring membership drive for our stimulus funding. Secretary Spellings, I'm going to give you the last word.
Well, thanks, Bob. And I think you've heard a lot of commonality between the three of us. And that is, I too echo the confidence in and the commendation of our educators, our school people broadly, for what they've done to lean into the breach, to respond. And they have engendered the confidence and support of their fellow Texans in ways I've never seen before. And I want to echo what Kevin said about this pandemic not dividing us, but I also want it not to define us as a low achieving state, under-resourced, with gigantic gaps in achievement and equity. And this is our moment to take the incredible levels of federal funding, the eyes of our citizens on us, and the high expectations they have for the future of our state embodied in their children. And I would commend a little call to action for all of us to pay attention over the next couple of years. How are these resources going to be spent? Specifically, as Kevin said, the federal law will require that to be quite transparent. Let's keep an eye on assessment. Let's stand for assessment, caring enough to find out how our students are doing, so that when we're all reconvened in 24, we can say we did the job. Our students are in much better shape than they were when we went into this. More of our kids on grade level, more of our kids college ready, more of our kids career ready, et cetera. And so this is our moment to show that confidence in our educators that they can do the job, and calling on all of us to A, support them, but B, critical partners and paying attention all along the way as this really renaissance moment, to use Kevin's phrase, is before us. I'm optimistic, but we got a lot of work to do.
Amen to all of that. And thank you so much to all three of you. If you joined us late, we were joined by Kevin Brown, the Executive Director of the Texas Association of School Administrators, Marisa Perez-Diaz on the State Board of Education, and Margaret Spellings, the CEO and President of the nonprofit Texas 2036. Thank you so much, all three of you, and have a good day, and we'll be back on stage again, I hope, sooner than later with all of you.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you, Bob.
Bye, Kevin. Bye, Marisa.
We'll now invite our three local school superintendents to join us. You don't have to be following education closely in San Antonio and Bexar County to know that we have more school districts than most people can name, but we are pleased to be joined by three highly regarded school superintendents today, all of whom are serving socioeconomically disadvantaged students in the city that the U.S. Census, as a reminder, ranks number one among the top 25 cities for the highest percentage of our population living below the poverty line. With that, I'd like to welcome Jeanette Ball, the superintendent of the Judson Independent School District. Jeanette, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. You are on mute, Jeanette. But while we let you address that, I'll welcome Roland Toscano, the superintendent of East Central Independent School District. Roland, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Bob. Happy to be here.
And finally, Eduardo Hernandez, the superintendent of Edgewood Independent School District. Eduardo, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me, Mr. Rivard. I appreciate this opportunity.
Well, let's just go by first names today, and I'm Bob, and we'll leave the Misters and Misses at the doorstep. And Jeanette, let me just do a quick mic check. I see you still on mute. But...
No, I'm off mute now, so I think hopefully you can hear me.
Okay, terrific.
Thank you.
Jeanette, I'm not sure your internet connection's good, but we're going to find out right now. I'm going to turn to you first. I think all three of you had the opportunity to listen to our previous panelists talk from really the state level, and now we'd like to bring it back down to the district level. All three of you have enormous responsibilities that you're facing that are really unprecedented. And who could have ever imagined the scenario of a pandemic and the impact it's had on society and on our schools? But here it is. Funding is on the way. And Jeanette, why don't you just start with some general remarks, and we'll let all three of you make some general remarks about both the challenges and opportunities in the moment.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for this opportunity. You know, we've been eagerly awaiting our funding because there's just a lot that we have to do for our students. I think we've all always known that the school districts and the campuses are a hub for our families. But one of the things that this pandemic has truly taught us is that families, the community, rely on school districts a lot more than anybody would have ever imagined. So a lot of people think that the hard work has begun, but in all reality, the hard work is yet to come when everybody comes back to school. I know here at Judson, we're at about almost 60% of our students coming back face to face. So we don't have them all back yet, and we're eagerly awaiting for them all to come back for next year. But as they're slowly coming back to us, we are noticing the needs, everything from the social emotional needs, the academic needs, and what we're calling the wraparound services. And those wraparound services include everything from all the things that are happening in their family, medical needs, financial needs. So there's a lot of services that we have to provide for our families, and we're willing to do that as a public school district. And we take on that responsibility that's what we want to do. But ultimately, we need the support and the help financially from the state in order to do that. So I know that not only myself, but my colleagues, we've been eagerly awaiting our funds so we could start to plan to do all the other things that still need to happen.
Well, thank you, Jeanette. And I think that sets up Roland and Eduardo to talk very specifically about exactly how do you get your arms around this enormous undertaking? Do you, in effect, rebudget and present to your school board a multi-year plan? We heard Kevin and Marisa and Secretary Spellings talking about this is really something that you're going to have to engage in at least through the end of 2024 with this funding. Roland?
Yeah, well, let me first start by saying that, you know, while this has been a very difficult time for all of us and everyone, I have seen some extraordinary things happen in education. I've seen teachers, performing at levels and accomplishing things that we never would have imagined. I've seen students doing the same. And while this has certainly had a negative effect on maybe the trajectory or the rate of learning in general, there has been a lot of things to be really excited about. In terms of our plans going forward, as Jeanette said, and I think panelists said earlier, we've been preparing for reentry of all students. We've been preparing for academic recovery and acceleration, maybe magnitudes for which we've not seen quite the same amount of in the past. But these conversations with our board about what our plans are going to need to be going forward have actually already happened. This infusion of dollars is going to help us accelerate and enrich many of the things that we had been preparing to launch and have actually already launched. But at the end of the day, as it relates to these funds, we certainly got to make sure that all of our expenditures are reasonable, that they're certainly transparent and inclusive of all voices and all shareholders, and they've got to have a return. And we've got to see the impact of the dollars that we're spending and the outcomes or ultimate effects on children's learning. And that's not new to us. We've been ridiculously transparent and accountable with all of the resources that we have available to us, and this will be no different. But one thing that I know for sure is that the social, emotional, and mental health support that our students and staff are going to need is definitely greater than we've ever experienced before. And so that's definitely going to have to be a priority. And it's a priority that we built out a plan for, and perhaps we can talk a little bit more about that later on in the conversation. But all in all, crises like these certainly reveal a lot about who we are as a system, as a community, as a people, and it always breeds innovation. Scarcity and uncertainty, it always breeds innovation, and that's really what I've seen more of since last March in education than I've ever seen in the previous 24 years that I've been in education.
Thank you, Roland. I was pleased to hear you call out teachers, because I've been talking to many of them in the last few weeks and have written about that. And they are coming toward the finish line of this academic year, somewhat exhausted, somewhat uncertain about what the summer holds and what the next academic year holds. They'll obviously be learning a lot, I think, in the very near term about this new level of funding and how it will positively impact them. Eduardo, in Edgewood, you're certainly no stranger to the digital divide, to students having to make do under very difficult circumstances at home and in the community. And I wonder whether or not you share the sense of optimism that Jeanette and Roland have about crisis being the opportunity to innovate and to address some of the deepest and thorniest issues in public schools.
I actually do echo what my colleagues have mentioned. The first thing I want to do is I want to thank our elected officials for actually giving us the opportunity to now have these funds to address, obviously, the immediate needs that we have in our individual districts. In my case, in Edgewood, but collectively, I think what the pandemic has done for us is that it's really demonstrated, whether it was the pandemic or the Snowvid event that we had later, that we're better collectively as one unit, as opposed to separate and not talking to one another. I'm a big proponent of people's humanity and really starting from that place and how we serve and support. Both my colleagues here are people that I work with as superintendents on understanding that there are better ideas out there than my own. And if I want to be responsible, you asked Mr. Rivard earlier, how are we going to be responsible with the funds that were allotted to us? That responsibility starts when superintendents talk about what are the best ideas that go forward. How do we support mitigating things like student learning? We've already heard about SEL support, mental health support, remediation of learning loss with everything from addressing maybe a loss of reading ability, but also doing things like extending the school year, and maybe now having school years like, for example, we go through the middle of June and start up again late in July, and really thinking of school as now, this is such a great opportunity to say we need more of a year-round school system that would address districts like mine, where students are probably better off in school with us to mitigate not just a pandemic, but also that summer slide that we have every year. And so I am very optimistic that this allows us an opportunity to also continue to join with our public partnerships, whether it's Alamo Colleges or while I was waiting, I was very delighted with the commercial that for Pre-K for Essay and that work, really working with those partners to take our collective, whether it's intellectual capital or financial capital, and how do we mitigate the needs of our communities, especially now that they've always been there. I think what the pandemic's done is just really brought them to the forefront. There's no way to look away. The digital divide has always existed, as you mentioned, in Edgewood, but I now have an opportunity to really bring that, eliminate that as much as possible, but also to continue to support my students' learning, the learning to just mitigate their family, the issues that sometimes keep them from learning, but also bring the additional personnel that we need to support that. And so I for one, continue to remain optimistic. I look forward to those public-private partnerships that we're developing, and also continuing to engage my teachers and listening to their feedback, to our school board, who has been a remarkable partner in this conversation. We started conversations back in January because we knew that money or not, we were going to have to address head on the lack of learning, the increased social emotional learning support, the additional things that students were going to need, like food lines. I mean, we had food lines from the very beginning, much like most school districts. But still, I anticipate that we will still continue to need to do that over the next 3 years. And so I've said it 4 times now. I am optimistic and will remain that way, because I think this is a good opportunity for us.
Well, that's terrific. And Jeanette, maybe you can be the first among the three of you to talk about this summer session coming up. Feels to me almost more like a full-blown session as you see a significant infusion of resources into the district and you deploy those to try to get people back into making up for lost learning. So can you, and then we'll let Roland and Eduardo talk about what's summer school going to look like in Judson?
Right. So, one of the things in planning for summer school is that it's a several prong approach, because we've also, I think, in working with my colleagues, we've all talked about that this has been a hard year for the adults in the system. So one of the things that we've all had to strategize is, in order to bring the kids back, we need the adults to help us with that. So I know we've all talked about, how do we incentivize our staff so we can have our staff to help with our students. So we've all come up with some great ideas, because we know that our summer school program is bigger than ever. We're inviting more students. We're having it at more campuses. Even our after school programs that we normally have in the summer, they're educational summer school programs that we've always provided them for our community, but we're revamping them so they're part of the extension of the learning, because we want to be able to maximize every moment that we have for our students. One of the things that we are so worried about is the early literacy component. That's always been our one of our biggest focuses, is the early literacy component. So that's been a challenge with the little ones. So we are really focusing with early literacy, and how do we make sure that parents feel comfortable bringing them face to face, because we see the most gains with our students that are coming face to face. So we know that that's very important, to be able to bring our students in. Then we're also targeting certain student populations. We want all our bilingual LEP ESL students to come back, our special ed students. We're not leaving anybody out, because we're also planning lots of great activities for our GT students also, but making sure that we target our students to make sure that who we're inviting back to come to our program is going to be in a very enriched environment that's going to help. Specifically right now with literacy, that is one of the indicators that we're seeing has a huge gap.
Thank you, Jeanette. Roland, when we first saw the impact of the pandemic on school districts, we quickly saw how many families became disconnected from the communications loop for the schools. We lost track of students. It became probably distant learning was most challenging with our very youngest, the pre-K, all of the children that we want to be reading by 3. And how much of a concern is that for you? And how successful are the districts now in getting an understanding of where every student is and getting them back into the system?
Bob, I'm really glad you asked that question, because it relates to summer programming. As we begin the recovery efforts, we're really talking a whole lot about reentry. We have so many students that have not been in school since last March, or have not been in school face-to-face throughout the better part of this year. And those are the students that, in a general sense, are struggling the most. And it's fear of coming back in person. It's fear of the fears that they've acquired over this pandemic, that they're somehow at risk of getting the virus and dying. And we have small children whose parents are trying really hard, and we're working together with them to convince them that they can come to school safely. Their parents want them in school, but the children have anxiety around reentering school. And so one of the things that we know is that whatever we do going forward has to infuse social and emotional support in curriculum and instruction. We all have a desire to dive into early childhood literacy and dive into the academics, but Maslow's comes before Bloom's. And in this particular case, we got to make sure all children are whole emotionally, and that they feel comfortable coming back to school, and that they don't feel like they're being driven into an academic corner immediately upon their return because of this urgency to catch up on learning loss. And so in addition to everything Jeanette said, about being more broad more diverse, more customized, more focused in summer programs. I think the foundation has to be around making sure that every child has what they need socially and emotionally so that they're comfortable gradually coming back to school and hopefully in the fall being fully engaged.
Those are such critical issues, Eduardo. Clearly, we're not going to achieve the herd immunity that we hope to, that we once had hoped to achieve by summer, by July or August. We have an awful lot of people that are vaccine hesitant or simply are not willing to. I don't know if it's apathy or if it's an anti-science bias or what, but we're just starting to inoculate, to vaccinate school age children in the teenage years. That's another responsibility that all of you are having to take on, a leadership role in. How difficult is that going to complicate your reentry plan for families and their children?
So I think the context of that conversation is really important in understanding what platforms you use to communicate with the members of your individual districts. I'll give you an example. For us, we have really worked hard at going to people. In Edgewood, we do something called neighborhood pláticas. And while I may not be able to go to someone's house, what I'm up against is a mindset that is very reminiscent of disenfranchised communities who, in the history of our great country, were put into predicaments that has created a distrust of public systems, specifically the health system. And so you see these factors in both the Latino community and the African American community in many instances. And so as the superintendent, understanding that, and also understanding that most of my viewers follow me on things like Twitter and Instagram between 12 and 8 p.m. And I can create a marketed message that involves students speaking about, hey, I came out and I got a shot. I feel I'm fine. Why? Because I want to be back at school. So, understanding that high school kids can badger their parents to the point where, hey, I want to go to school, I want to go to school, I want to go to school. And so do middle school kids. But also working through workshops or sometimes it's individual relationships with our parent services department and educating our parents. So summer school is really different. And I love what Roland said, Maslow before Bloom's. It's true. You can get really caught up in the melee of let's get everybody back in, let's get everybody educated. Well, they first need to understand that, hey, I care, before I bring you and make this about only learning, I care about you as a person. That goes a long way when someone is distrustful of the school system. And most of our families work with school systems based on how they were treated. And so we're not going to get into people's journey through schools, but I think understanding the communication piece and then leveraging relationships like the ones wonderful teachers create every day, principals, social workers, counselors, the governing board also, because they are elected by the constituents, and giving someone the talking points they need to be able to convince a parent that this is the best course of action. But then here's what happens after you get a shot. It isn't just, I got you, you got your shot, we're done with you. No. Then here's the list of things that we will do to help you come back into the school and help you also address some factors that you may or may not be ready to tell me about. And so I think that being aware of that, the challenge is there. I don't shy away from that. I think most superintendents in our city don't, because they love the communities they serve. But understanding the communication piece is going to be really vital in our own context.
Nothing underscores for me the incredible responsibility that we put on your shoulders as community leaders than the long food lines that we saw throughout the pandemic. And we turned to school campuses and expected schools to feed their students even when the school campuses were closed. And it was really a remarkable logistical undertaking that every district did. And I think you should all be very proud of that. It did not go unnoticed. But it also underscores the fact that we do turn to you too to address all of the emotional issues that are in play right now, not just for your students of all ages, but in fact, a lot of their families have the emotional issues start at home, and people are unemployed and have issues over the ability to pay their utility bills or their rent or their home mortgage. We've had a lot of stimulus money come in and mask the fact that we have tens of thousands of families that are unemployed and on the edge financially. And how, with such limited resources like 1 or 2 guidance counselors per campus or social workers, how are you possibly going to meet that emotional demand as you reopen, even with this funding? Jeanette, do you want to take a crack at that?
Sure. I know I know that what we are planning is to partner with a lot of the entities that we're surrounded with. One of them that I could mention is our communities and schools. So we are partners and have been partners with communities and schools, and we're relying heavily on them to help and support us because they provide a lot of the services that our students need. So we are certainly going to continue to expand and grow that program, along with hiring additional counselors and social workers. But I think that very soon, those individuals, there's going to be a huge shortage of those individuals because there is such a demand for the social emotional needs of our students. And even also keep in mind the adults in our system and the adults of the community. So we're going to continue to seek those partnerships. One of the amazing things about San Antonio is the surrounding agencies that we're all surrounded with, whether it's the communities and schools, UP partnership, and many others that provide some great services for our students and for our families. I know we've been involved with a service of My Brother's Keeper, and there's just going to be a lot of other outside agencies that we're going to be calling on as superintendents and asking for help. I think that's one of the many unique things about myself and our colleagues is we're not afraid to ask for help because we know that it benefits our students. So we're going to be asking for the help and be knocking on people's doors and saying, come and help us and be a part of this journey to help our students be successful.
Roland?
Yes, I'll add to that by saying that our focus has been on really looking at our internal structure for coordinating and connecting providers in the system or in the greater community to the students and families that need those supports, right? So when an organization like Communities and Schools or any of those that Jeanette mentioned has resources available to support us, what does their entry point to the district look like? Do they have to navigate our system and therefore have inefficiency connecting to the greatest students with the greatest needs in real time? Or are we very structured to simply engage with such that we can ensure that no student falls through the cracks? And so for us, we're really building out a more comprehensive case management program that takes communities and schools, counselors, and a campus-based team to really take a look at the individual child, knowing that once that child has experienced trauma or has experienced difficulty, they're probably always going to be a student we're going to need to watch throughout their experience with us. It's not just a one and done deal. So that's typically how we've seen children fall through the cracks. We identify a need, we push in some support, we give them a little counseling, maybe some academic support, and then we kind of say, okay, you're good. And the reality of it is they've got to be on our watch list. We've got to check in periodically to make sure they're still thriving and then respond when they're not. And so we've not ever done that the way we're going to do it. And through this comprehensive case management model, we think we'll be better able to leverage all of the resources that we have at our disposal through many of the partnerships that our own community and the greater San Antonio community has available to all of us.
Eduardo, some of those nonprofits that we're hearing named have experienced their own funding crises through the pandemic, of course, and so their abilities to partner with you as much as they want is probably predicated to some degree on their abilities to fundraise independent of you. But will districts like Edgewood be able to allocate any of the stimulus funding coming in from the federal government to support those entities boosting their own level of service in your districts, or will that be off limits for them?
So yes, we will be able to assist. And as a matter of fact, so I won't name the ones that have already been named because we're using them too, but like we've had a good relationship with Girl Scouts of America. They are actually in one of our buildings, our old Coronado Middle School, and they have provided support for our girls throughout the pandemic, and in fact are running summer school programming for kinder and first grade readiness. We know kindergarten and pre-Ks did not come mostly to school this year. So we have a program where we end school June 18th and they start June 21st and they go through the end of July. And it is helping them. And it is not just classroom work. We know that social emotional support is not just sitting in a desk and hearing a lesson. Sometimes it's going through activities that enhance the notion of I am enough. which is one of the early messages. We just opened up our girls' school. Our girls' school's Pledge of Allegiance every morning is "I am enough" as a young lady, where we teach young ladies about her story. How are you developing her story? Our Young Men's Academy opens up this fall. It will be the same thing. So social emotional awareness is not just in the classroom. And so how we're enhancing that is that for districts like ours, we've inserted 6 additional intercession weeks throughout the calendar that are meant to allow for a jumpstart advancement in July, a brain break in October, an additional week in the winter break, right after spring break for another intercession week, and then an additional 2 weeks in June. Why? Because what that allows the teacher is to say, I may have 20 kids in my class, but now I'm only going to bring back 10. And of those 10, I'm only going to work with 5 while the other 5 go out and do things like learn. We are now teaching self-defense. We are now teaching academic decathlon. So it is not just in the classroom. And social emotional support what it really is saying, I am enough as a person. I want you to see me. That's what pandemics, and even if the pandemic wasn't present, steals from our communities. It steals their sense of identity. And so I'm a huge proponent of it. I plan to use not just the partnership with Girl Scouts of America, but we're also a portfolio district. And so we partnered through the 1882 Senate bill opportunity that the state is financially still supporting, working with partners like TAMUSA, Pre-K for SA, Learn for Life, the Texas Council for International Studies. So we're talking about how do we leverage the little I've got, little you've got, and bring it together, and so that we can get through the next 3 years and understanding up front, we're going to take care of Maslow's needs first, and we're not trying to get to the finish line because this is a marathon, not a sprint. That's how we continue to be responsible and support this transition back into our new normal, as we're calling it.
I hope our audience today is feeling as optimistic as I am after hearing you and our previous panelists, because it seems clear to me that we have very strong education leadership in place and that you're focused and engaged on the challenges ahead. I wonder, as a closing opportunity or question, and Jeanette, I'll start with you. What can we as a community do to help you succeed over the next 1, 2, 3 years as we climb out of this pandemic and surmount all of the challenges that it posed? I think you're on mute, Jeanette, and I don't want to miss a word.
There we go. So I think that for me, one of the things personally is I value an education, and that was instilled in me, through my mom so many years ago. I want people to realize that we're in this with them. It is not us against the community or us against parents. And I would even speak for my colleagues, when we took on this responsibility of becoming superintendents, we knew that people's livelihoods rest on our shoulders. And it's something that we take seriously and we don't take lightly. When we're going to be entrusted with these millions of dollars, it's something that we are not taking lightly, and we don't mind being held accountable. We don't, because we take this responsibility seriously. We want people to know that it's safe to come back. We've worked very hard to make our buildings safe places to come back. We've also worked really hard in putting together some amazing things, because we know that most students don't come for the math, the science, and the ELAR. They come for other activities. So we've been putting lots of places in place to make sure that school is something engaging where our kids want to be. So I think for me, what I would want the community to know is it's time. It's time to come back. We're never going back to normal, because we're going back to better. It's definitely a better system, but it's certainly time for everybody to come back to us, and we are ready to help with the fears that people might have, with the academic needs, the social needs, the wraparound services needs, and we're ready for people to come back, and we're excited for what the new normal is going to bring next year.
Thank you, Jeanette. Roland, thank you for all you do for East Central, and what can we do for you? You're on mute too, Roland.
Boy, you'd think we'd mastered this by now.
I think we've all had enough of Zoom to last us a lifetime, and I can't wait to stay and shake your hands again.
Yeah, we certainly have, and echo that. I love that Jeanette said we're not coming back to normal. We're coming back to better, and I couldn't agree more. I do believe that after the pandemic subsides and all the emotions and the politics give way to logic and common sense, that our communities and our schools are going to be much better places to live and learn than they were before. As I said before, scarcity and uncertainty, they're catalysts for creative problem solving and innovation. Our approaches to schooling will, and they should never be the same as they were before the pandemic. They're going to be more individualized. They're going to be more blended. They're going to be more adaptable, aligned, equitable, and transparent than ever before. Adversity reveals character, and I know that every community saw the character of their local schools and school systems as they became the center part of every community, meeting the needs of every child in the communities that they serve. I do hope that as a greater community, as Jeanette said, that everyone knows that we have no problem being accountable. In fact, we expect to be held accountable. We want to account for everything that it is our communities expect for us to deliver on for its children. But I hope that the pendulum begins to swing away from educators being marginalized, being underappreciated, and being vilified. While there are some among us, as there are in any profession, that don't rise to the standard, trust me, we eat our own because we have a standard of excellence for every educator among our ranks. And we expect them to be capable of serving our own children in a manner that we would find pleasing. And so together, we want to be held accountable. We want to push our work forward. We know that we're going to come out of the other end of this pandemic better than we ever were before. And as has been stated many times in this conversation today with both panels, we're better together. And we've got to make sure that we're united unlike ever before around public education in San Antonio. Education in Texas is an investment. It is not an expense.
Well stated, Roland. Thank you so much. And Eduardo, we don't have to live in Edgewood to want to see you and your colleagues be successful in Edgewood. So listening to Jeanette and Roland, what would you add?
Well, I think they took most of everything that I thought I was going to say, but I'm going to tell parents just from a purely humanistic point of view. Hey, first thing is I want to acknowledge, I understand the last year has been very difficult. I know that because I've seen you in our food lines. I've seen you when we're visiting schools and you're outside trying to get any type of assistance that you can get. I acknowledge that. But I want you to take the energy that probably got you to go to the school and ask for help, which is probably the energy of loving your children. I know that men and women like the three you see here and the rest of the superintendents in Bexar County, we love our kids. Every experience we've had, our personal design, how we were created as human beings, brought us to this place. I don't believe in accidental things in life. I think that we are put in places to serve, and every superintendent in Bexar County serves and supports from the best place that they know how. And so I would implore to our parents, this is our one opportunity to really reset. If we really love, whether it's Judson or Edgewood or East Central, wherever you're at, and you had a concern, a complaint, if you want to call it that, and you felt like you weren't listened to, this is an opportunity to join the conversation and reset how we do school. What the pandemic did was came in and flattened all those things we thought were the way the world worked. It came in and showed us just how small we are. But what we have is an opportunity to serve the children that are in front of us. I still get up every day looking at kids and knowing that I get to see the future because of what I do today. That has not changed. It will not change. Edgewood is still going to be the Edgewood that people perceive in terms of the challenges that we have, but I own them. And you can walk with your head held high. There is no shame in being poor or whatever other word you want to look at it. But this is the opportunity we said we wanted to change things. So I would say to you, join us, come talk to us, talk to your local superintendent. Each one of us want what's best for our children, just like that teacher you see every day. He or she takes it home, comes back, is exhausted, yes, but still gets back because the same love you have for your kids, they have for our kids. Nobody joins this profession for the money. We do it because we love children. And so I would say to our parents, join us. We're about to do something great. We're coming back to better, as my colleague said. We're going to, what did Roland say? We're going to put Maslow first before Bloom's. We're going to take that into consideration. But I think every superintendent in Bexar County is still honored to be a superintendent and serve the children of our great city. And so I would close with that, Mr. Rivard.
Well, and it's a great closing. And thank you, all three of you, for participating in our panel today and for your larger service in public education. Jeanette Ball from the Judson Independent School District, Roland Toscano from the East Central Independent School District, and Eduardo Hernandez from the Edgewood Independent School District. Thanks so much for joining us today. And thank you to our sponsors. Again, these events, which are free and open to all, would not be possible without them. Our leadership sponsors, Mike and Louise Burke, who have been such incredible supporters of public education initiatives in San Antonio and Pre-K for SA. We love that video that started us off today. Thank you to our gold sponsors, the Gambrinus Company, which incidentally supports the Shiner interns here at the San Antonio Report, a great program with St. Mary's University students. First Mark Credit Union, the law firm of Schulman, Lopez, Hoffer, and Adelstein, and Idea Public Schools, and all of our silver and bronze sponsors who we link to in the chat room and who make this year's event free for everyone to attend. And just on a personal note, let me say this has been quite a year at the San Antonio Report too. We changed our name from the Rivard Report to the San Antonio Report, a reflection of the continuing growth that we are experiencing in service to the community. We hired Angie Mock as our new president and CEO, and that's working out wonderfully. And we now have Wendy Cook as our managing editor leading our newsroom, and eventually we'll be welcoming a new editor. So as we approach our 10th anniversary of continuous publication, something I'm very personally proud of, I can't tell you how much I appreciate each and every one of you as individual members, as business members, our donors, the foundation and philanthropists that support us. We see ourselves serving our community for many years ahead. And we've built a wonderful team here of talented journalists and nonprofit workers. And as we engage in a spring membership drive, I hope you'll be generous in supporting their commitment to you. This is Robert Rivard. I'm the editor of the San Antonio Report, and I look forward to seeing you at our next education forum in June. Thank you so much.